when you see the President Biden's agenda and what exactly he's here to do in Europe, what will be his most difficult day? He went from the G7 to NATO to this EU summit, US-EU summit, and then to meeting Vladimir Putin tomorrow.
Well, the most difficult day will be meeting Vladimir Putin, clearly. But these trips are very important because they are of symbolic significance, given what happened in the last 4 years during Donald Trump, particularly with regard to the EU, because the prior administration thought the EU was essentially a waste and not effective. This administration considers, in my view, appropriately, the EU is actually a critical partner. So that summit is going to be very important. I welcome the fact there's going to be a Boeing-Airbus agreement. I haven't seen the text yet. There are going to be some interesting discussions in there about what kind of subsidies are going to be covered going forward. And there's going to be some difficult conversations as well about what about those aluminum and steel tariffs. And that's a difficult domestic political issue for the president, but I think there is a way forward on that topic as well. But clearly, the discussion with Putin is going to be very direct. I suspect there's a lot of unfinished business, Francine, the last administration. So I believe that Biden will say, look, this time, unlike the last 4 years, I stand shoulder to shoulder with an alliance, and we will respond seriously.
Ambassador, when you look at some of the, what the U.S. actually needs the EU for, is it to deal with China and Russia, or is it just to try and go back to an older, normal world order?
Will rely or hope to work with the EU on many areas, but China clearly is the acid test. Now, some in the EU and member states don't want to hear that message. They keep on saying, yes, of course, we're going to work with you on China, but we see China a different way. The fact of the matter is, politically, it is the acid test. That's the way Congress looks at it. Many U.S. voters will look at it. What good are allies, including the EU, if they're not going to work with us on the key challenge going forward? The EU likes to say we want to work within the rules. Of course, we want to work within the rules, too, in the institutions like the WTO. But rules are just not going to be enough, Francine. It's going to have to also mean sending China some very clear messages. We saw that coming out of NATO. I hope we see it coming out of the EU as well. The U.S. and the Trade and Tech Council will be very much part of that. The supply chains will be part of that discussion as well, reducing our reliance on China. And also, how do we get significant WTO reform?
Does China retaliate? So what's the best way to actually deal with China?
Well, one of the best ways is actually finally working with our allies, and this is what this is all about. You know, in the old days, under Trump, it was bilateral, transactional, one-on-one with China, because the EU thought that the EU was a distraction. But if we work with our allies, particularly the EU, and let's remember, the EU is a trading and regulatory superpower in those two areas, it's much more effective to go to China and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring more cases against you, but we're not just. We're actually going to close our markets to you if you don't open up your markets and open up your investment practices. So it's a much more effective way of proceeding, and I think the Chinese understand that very well. Remember, they've been looking for years at ways of dividing Europe internally and dividing Europe from the United States.
Ambassador, what does Russia actually need from the U.S. tomorrow?
What do they need? Well, I think they're getting what they want, which is a recognition that Russia's a player, that the United States takes Russia seriously, and hence this meeting, the summit. And clearly, they're a player in some parts of the world, and we can cooperate with them on some areas of important issues like climate change and so forth, and also the Iran agreement. So they're getting what they want, but I think the message will be, no more election interference. You have to control these bodies that are operating in Russia, sometimes with state approval, and sometimes, the state is looking the other way. Bodies that are, putting out a lot of disinformation that's repeated in our media. So there's going to be some strong discussion about that.
But does Vladimir Putin, what's the incentive for Vladimir Putin to kind of, heed the warnings and maybe temper what's been happening over the last 4 to 5 years? Well, to date, we've done rather modest things in response to Russia's aggressive behaviors. I mean, expelling a few diplomats, of course, means nothing. But if we can work with our allies in tightening the sanctions we have in place on Russia, and doing things which are asymmetric, releasing information to the social media about exactly what the Kremlin is doing with its cronies, it's the kleptocratic nature of the regime, embarrass Putin if necessary, or engage in cyber activities to send a message that we too can play this game. That will send a very strong message. So no more business as usual of these modest half measures. And we should even consider sectoral sanctions if the EU is ready to go along. That's always a big problem. Under my time as ambassador to the EU, it was very difficult, even after the invasion of the Ukraine, to get all of the EU member states to act. But we finally did. Remember, we finally did, late but quite effectively.
Anthony Gardner, thanks so much for joining us today, former U.S. ambassador there to the EU.